Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Anthro Stories today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Professor Panagakos with the CRC Anthropology Department, and we'd like to welcome you to Anthro Stories with Kim Whitfield. Anthro Stories is an occasional speaker series which seeks to highlight the academic, career, and personal journeys of anthropologists working and learning here in Northern California. The goal is to give our students exposure to the varied and diverse perspectives found in anthropology, a discipline which studies the whole experience of what it means to be human, from present day to ancient societies, our biology, our evolution, our language, and our culture. So before we begin today, just a few housekeeping items. Be sure if you didn't sign in when you came in, be sure you do so on your way out, just so we can keep track of who is here today. And we will make sure that if you're here for extra credit, that your instructor knows that you came in today. Please also note that the presentation is being recorded, so it will be available on CRC's YouTube channel for your viewing pleasure later on. And also just one other thing, before you put your cell phones away, because we do appreciate it if you could have your phones put away for this presentation, I do want you to take a minute. If you like our CRC Anthro Facebook page or you follow us on Instagram, we're actually going to be doing a little social media promotion this morning. And so if you like the post, I'm going to post a couple times during the presentation. If you like the post and comment on it, either on Instagram or Facebook, could just be something like Anthro rocks or great presentation or whatever, then your name will be entered to win 2 SAC excursion train tickets, and also, if you like, a personal tour of the California State Railroad Museum with Kim herself. So, and we'll remind you at the end of the presentation as well. So you can find us on both Facebook and Instagram at CRC Anthro. And so again, just like our posts and make a short comment, and your name will be entered to win. Okay, so with that, just a couple of things. By way of introduction, I'd like to first introduce our 2 CRC anthropology students, Saverio Bernardi and Ben Scoville, who will be interviewing Kim for the first part of this presentation. And so Kim will just be talking about some of her experiences. And then she's going to give us a presentation about what she does at the California State Railroad Museum and how her degree in anthropology took her to that job career. And there will be time for questions, and Kim told me that I have to keep her on track if she goes too over with time, because she tends to get excited about this topic. So we'll go from there. So I would like to welcome Kim and also thank Vasily and Mike for setting up our room and doing all our technical things today and for recording. And so with that, Kim, welcome. And welcome.
Wonderful. Welcome, everybody.
Mike, check, check, check.
Beautiful.
All right.
So, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is really great.
Louder?
Louder. Okay, louder.
You got to speak louder. Never been told that before. Okay. So first of all, hello and welcome back to CRC. How is it to be back here?
You guys have a parking garage. There was no parking garage or light rail when I went to college here. I graduated in 2008. So it's great.
Okay, so to start off all these questions, what exactly is your job and what do you do? We're going to right out of the gate here.
Right. So I am the Park Interpreter 2 at California State Railroad Museum. So I'm a Parks employee. What does Park Interpreter 2 actually mean? What that really means is that I manage exhibits and interpretive programming at the Railroad Museum. And I've been in my position for 2 years. I've been at the museum for almost 3 years, 3 years in April. Yay. I started in visitor services, and at the same time that my director started working there. And so we both kind of have come up in the institution together, working together and thinking about exhibits and interpretive programming and our internal organizational community and our external community and how we do the things that we do at the Railroad Museum. So my primary focus for the past 2 years has been exhibits and changing the physical internal look and feel of the museum.
What kind of exhibits do you work on typically?
So That's a really great question. So there are really like two types of exhibits. There's temporary exhibits and permanent exhibits, right? Permanent exhibits are here and they live in the museum for anywhere from 15 to 40 years. The museum at large was opened in 1981, and for the most part, the base infrastructure of the exhibits at the museum haven't really changed much. There's been lots of additions over time. There's been infrastructure overlay, so adding panels, adding content. There's been some changes. They moved a train into the lobby, that kind of thing. But there haven't really been any big systemic changes in terms of the way that we interpret and the way that we put content in to the museum. And so by and large, while there are people's stories throughout the museum within the base structure and original format of the institution, there's been a lot of focus and energy put towards technical details, rivets, couplers. This locomotive was built in Baltimore in 1900 and does this thing on the railroad. So what we've started really doing is focusing on people's stories. And so the exhibits that I'm working on are, at their core, community-centered, so they amplify the voices of members of our community that haven't been amplified in our space before. And they're either through temporary exhibits, which is in our roundhouse, we have 3 tracks that we can move in and out of the museum. We can move large locomotives in and out of the museum. So each winter and summer, we program a new temporary exhibit. So we have a winter exhibit and a summer exhibit. And those are places where we experiment with storytelling and hands-on activities and all kinds of stuff. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, so I won't cover it too much now.
Okay.
And then permanent exhibits, like our Chinese Workers Experience exhibit.
So what initially got you interested in anthropology?
That's a great question. So I've always been an artist, and I've always been interested in art. And when I was in high school, my mom was very worried that I would become an artist and not make any money. So she started putting me in graphics design programs, or encouraging me to pursue graphics design programs, and so I did. And I started at Sac City because I wasn't really sure that that's what I wanted to do, and I didn't really want to spend a whole lot of money doing it. I started college in 2005, and at the time, there's the beginnings of a major economic recession. So there wasn't a whole lot of money to go around. And I'm also the first person in my family to go to college. So my parents also didn't really understand how to get through the process. So I really had to kind of take the charge in figuring out how to forge my own path into my future. So I started taking graphics design classes, and that became more overwhelming and competitive than I wanted to be in, because once you start making art for money, then it becomes a commercial product and not a passion anymore. So I switched to fine arts, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to make screen prints for the rest of my life. It's going to be great. And I was going to take a course, a survey course in art, and it got canceled. And so I said, well, I guess I have to finish my associate's degree anyway, so I'll just, drop in this course that I have to take. And magic, witchcraft, and religion sounds cool, so let's see what that's all about. I took my first anthropology course at Sac City with Pamela Lindell, Professor Pamela Lindell, and the first day of class, she was wearing a jean jacket. And I don't know if you know this professor at all, or is she still teaching out there? Yeah, she's amazing. And she's talking to us about anthropology and what anthropology is, and talking about her career and her field work. And she takes off her jacket, and she has the coolest tattoo. But it has such deeper anthropological meaning. And that connection to larger, bigger questions and bigger things and concepts to think about was an immediate draw for me. Because in art and graphics design, what I was really looking for is problem solving. And in anthropology, I mean, humans are really unique, you know? Like, we're incredibly interesting as all of the cultures that we are and all of the history that there is. And that seemed like the biggest, coolest, dopest problem to solve. So I immediately switched my major. I also didn't know that you could get paid to do anthropology. And when I found out that, I was like, cool, let's do this. And so even though I had a goal and I was headed that direction, I built in enough flexibility to shift my path and move down that way. Yeah.
Great.
And the rest is history.
So to kind of build upon that, as an interpreter and an anthropologist, what are you really proud of accomplishing in your work, in your career?
That's a really interesting question, too. And I know I keep saying they're interesting questions because they are. As a perfectionist, I'm always striving for excellence. So I think that moment is always going to be something that I'm reaching for. But the installation of the 150th exhibits for the anniversary of the 150th Transcontinental Railroad was probably the first time that I created multiple large-scale exhibits that had a professional finish, the most professional finish that I have ever achieved in my career. And I've been in museums for 10 years, and that was last May. So I'm really pretty proud of that moment. The Carrington exhibit that I just installed actually is probably the most cohesive look in terms of look and feel for an exhibit. So I'm pretty proud of that. But I'm also really proud of the team that I've developed at work and that my team members and working together with them. And so anytime as a collective that we produce something really quality, I'm really proud of my team. And it's not really an individual effort. It's a group effort. Nothing I do can be done without my team.
Awesome.
So kind of going back to your roots, what was your experience like at CRC? And what was your favorite part of it?
Oh, man. My experience was really great. Coming out of high school, having taken honors courses and feeling a lot of pressure to go to a 4-year university right out the gate, was too much for me. And so coming into CRC, I was really concerned that I wasn't going to get as good an education as my cohorts at 4-year universities. But when I got here and I started taking courses and I started getting into the coursework and meeting professors and really working closely and talking about what my goals were and moving forward, I found that there was a lot of support around what it is that I wanted to do and how I wanted to move forward. And these professors are amazing. They're brilliant, they're educated, they're knowledgeable, and they have wonderful patience for someone who doesn't know where they're going. And so my experience was really great. There was one semester I took 24 units spread across 2 campuses. I highly do not recommend that. So that was a little stressful. But I had a really good time. I did a lot of different things. I had a lot of opportunities. I went on a lot of field trips, which was cool, with the geography department. Sorry, Anthro. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. I had a good time. And I really like to learn and communicate and talk about things in discussion, both in class and then outside of class. And there was a really good environment built for that here.
So after CRC, you went to Chico State, right? So what was your experience of anthropology like at Chico State?
Chico State is rad. Chico State is really great, and there's a lot of programs available in opportunities in anthropology, UC Davis is a great campus. They have a great program. I chose Chico State because the campus is beautiful, for one thing. There's like a creek running right through the campus. But also because the program as a whole at Chico State is multidisciplinary, right? So it's the 4-field approach and 5 or 6 if you include museum studies and visual anthropology. The visual anthropology program is a lot more robust now than when it was when I started. Well, we can talk about why in a second. But there was, the other attraction to Chico State is that there were working labs and hands-on experience. I'm a hands-on learner. I like to build things, I like to do things. And so there were a lot of opportunities there at the Lane L. Smith Museum of Anthropology, the Heritage Resource Conservation Lab with Dr. Georgia Fox, and that's about cleaning artifacts, and I worked there for a little while. The archaeology lab is pretty extensive. The Human Bodies Research Lab, and forgive me, I'm not sure if that's the actual title, but they like focus in on forensics. Visual anthropology, which is about film production and creating documentaries, which I was really involved in. So I created a film documentary as my honors in the major thesis project with the Mechoopda Maidu Indian tribe in Chico. And that was a hugely formative experience for me as an anthropologist, but also as like a person. And it's been almost 10 years since I went on the Nome Cult Walk for research for this project. And I think I still think about it absolutely every day. Maybe I'm down to once a week now. But it really informed a lot of the way that I think and feel about the world and about the work that I do.
So, kind of along the same lines of the classes that you took in college, when you decided to switch to anthropology and really go into it, what classes did you take that, though not directly related to anthropology, I mean, everything's related to anthropology,
right,
but while not related to the major, are now invaluable in your work?
So as an exhibit designer, graphics design has been absolutely invaluable. And not just as an exhibit designer. Pretty much every job from archaeology to, I don't know, like I was going to work at Ace Hardware for a while when I was living in Humboldt because I needed a job. And the whole interview conversation was less about selling hardware, which I've done in my life, and more about working on their media and like social media and print media. So every single job that I have had has called upon my skills in graphics design, from like flyers to creating like sidewall profiles for dig sites. And now I really use those skills to create and design the visual look and feel and meet storytelling visually. And so it's really an invaluable skill because it's tough to communicate with outside graphics designers when they don't understand necessarily the connection between history and anthropology and storytelling and the types of visual information that you want to convey, right? Because storytelling is 2 parts. It's the words that you write on a panel, but it's also what you see. And so it's meeting those 2 things in the middle. And that's where graphics design has really been beneficial for me.
So at what point did you realize that after going into anthropology that museum studies was the specific region what you wanted to go after? So at what point did that happen?
Again, I didn't realize it was a job you could get paid for. And I know I talk a lot about money, but I like to eat and live in a house or somewhere. So it's important to utilize the skills and tools that you have and the values and your mission, personal mission, to put good works in the world, but then also to eat. So to answer your question, throughout my junior college experience, I was really focused in archaeology. Between graduating from CRC and starting at Chico State, I went to Cabrillo College Archaeology and Technology program because the fastest way to get your foot in the door in archaeology is to go to field school. And that was the best field school in my price range at the time. There's lots of field schools, but I also chose that one specifically because it was about California archaeology and looking at CRM programs, looking at the Forest Service, which I actually ended up working for, looking at any, state agencies, California archaeology, and living in California is where it's at. So I did field school, and then I transferred to Chico State. In terms of working, the following summer that I started at Chico State in 2009, I got recruited by the Forest Service to go to Eagle Lake Ranger District on the Lassen to work as a field tech in archaeology for the summer, which was really cool. And if you can get into that, you don't need to be recruited. You can apply for those kinds of positions. They're awesome. You get to spend the summer in the barracks and live in the forest. It's great. So I was at Chico for maybe 2 semesters, and I started looking at all of the different classes to take, and that's when I met Dr. Fox and got into looking at what the Museum Studies program was about there, and then I started taking courses. And having work experience in the archaeology field, there was a lot in archaeology. There's a lot in archaeology that's really important work, but there's a lot in archaeology, especially with the Forest Service, that there is arguing with logging companies and firefighters because they're there to make money or they're there to protect the land. And the cultural resources, it's a really serious fight. And I felt like my interest in problem solving and my feelings about my mission and the work that I wanted to do in the world would be better served by looking in the museum field. Plus, collections was probably the gateway from archaeology to museums. It's material culture across the board, and it is anthropology, right? So when I found an avenue in which I could use my passion for material culture and archaeology and my skills as an artist, that was it. I was like, all right, this is where we're going. New goal, shift positions. Let's start working towards that.
So you were telling us about how you got involved with the Forest Service, right? But after that, how exactly did you end up at the Railroad Museum?
I worked a lot of other places before the Railroad Museum. And I'll talk a little bit about this in my presentation, but when I started college, before the gig economy was a thing, the idea was that you go to college and then you drop right into your career and it's a straight line. But it really isn't that way. You got to try a lot of different things. You got to see where you fit. Your personal mission and your personal values have to fit the culture of the organization that you're working with, both in the mission of the organization, but also internal organizational culture. So I worked at the San Francisco Museum and Historical Society while I was in graduate school at John F. Kennedy University, pursuing a master's degree in museum studies and an MBA. I interned at the Mendocino County Museum, working with a maritime collection, which kind of closely related to some of the work that I was doing at Chico State. I had a side hustle in graphics design where I was doing graphics design for small museums who couldn't afford a large firm to come and do design for them. And I moved all over the country. So I moved to Buffalo, New York with my husband because he was working in student housing. We moved to Humboldt. We moved back to Sacramento. And while I was in Sacramento, I worked at the brand new art museum at UC Davis, Manetti Shrem, Museum of Art, and I was still looking for something. And so I was applying for parks jobs, I was applying everywhere. And I applied for a job in collections, working for exhibits at the Railroad Museum. But the guide supervisor, Jason Rankins, in visitor services, pulled my resume off the stack and said, "I'm gonna hire you." And I said, "Great, let's go." So I started at the Railroad Museum as a seasonal employee, which is a very common story for a lot of parks employees. The state system is a little bit challenging when you're applying for it. There's lots of courses and classes and guidance that you can get, but I was just applying for jobs everywhere. So I started in visitor services as seasonal. I was doing graphics design. I was bringing school groups into the museum and talking with them about what they can do in the museum and welcoming them to our museum. And I was thinking a lot about our new strategic plan that we had just released at the Railroad Museum. And so that's really how I kind of got started. And then the first big project. So I'm sorry, the story's a little all over the place. Before I actually got the job in visitor services, I had applied for a job at the Cultural Resource Center at McClellan. Have you guys visited that location yet? You should get a tour, it's awesome. It's a giant airplane hangar, floor-to-ceiling shelves of collections. It's very cool. But that's where the state houses their collection. And I had actually interviewed for a position to work with the Native American collection and do some NAGPRA stuff as a seasonal employee still. So I had made some connections with the hiring staff there. And when I was at the Railroad Museum, I got a call, and all of the names have flown out of my head, I'm sorry. The question was, the interdepartmental team designing Native American Day in September is looking for someone to design an exhibit for them, for the state capitol. It'll be in front of the governor's office and upstairs in the rotunda. And you seem to be the perfect person. You have experience working with the Native community, and you're a graphics designer and an exhibit designer, so let's talk. So I got hooked up with that project, still as a seasonal employee, still working for visitor services. And I'm incredibly privileged that my supervisor, Jason, allowed me to work on that project, and that my director also allowed me to work on that project. So the theme was tribal sovereignty. Imagine designing an exhibit to go into the state capitol in front of the governor's office about tribal sovereignty. What do you do? Like, I don't know. So we sat down with the team and we talked about it, and I said, why don't we allow the community to speak for themselves? I don't personally believe in the narrator academic God voice from nowhere, so let's put out a call and see what the community has to say about tribal sovereignty and what it means to them. So that's what we did. And we got responses back from tribal leaders. And so I got a picture of them and blew them up really big and put them on a 4-foot by 8-foot panel and put their quote about tribal sovereignty on the bottom. We did that for Native veterans for the rotunda, and we highlighted 4 community members for in front of the governor's office. So right as you come out of the elevator, you see a giant Native American with a quote about tribal sovereignty. It was awesome.
So cool.
So it was really, really good. And with that project, I think it was a way for my director to see the kind of work that I could do. And after that, I started working more directly with him on strategic planning and shifting the internal and organizational culture of the museum.
Thank you. Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions, so we'll get off the stage and let you do your main presentation.
Thank you. Thanks again for having
Thank you.
me. It was great.
Thank you for coming.
All right. How's everybody doing? Good? Yeah? So our lives are made of railroad stories. This is our primary story filter at the Railroad Museum. But it really is true for American culture as a whole. The Northwest Passage was not a boat through some pass. It was overland on iron rails. The minute the Transcontinental Railroad was built, the economy started booming, the country started shifting. A trip across the country was no longer, Jimmy got bit by a snake and died. 8-month tour. It was now a journey you could make a visit. And this phenomenon has impacted our culture from movies to music to language, off track, derailed, running on time. Believe it or not, double header is also a railroad term. Can I move this up here? Technical guy? Okay. At any rate, and you might think also, yeah, sure, that's the language we use, and I'm not really that impacted by the railroad. But have you ever been driving across town in rush hour traffic and you're stopped at a train station or a train crossing and you're like, I'm waiting for this freight train to go by. I know it's carrying a lot of stuff associated with our economy and the food we eat and the cars we drive and the building materials we make our houses with, but, who put a railroad in the middle of town? What a terrible design plan. Well, guess what? The railroad was not put there by design. The town built up around the railroad. And that's true for a lot of towns in the United States. So while I don't really consider myself a railroad person, like my interest in anthropology in undergraduate was the Inca, maritime archaeology. I do have a really interesting relationship with the railroad. So my first job out of high school was with the Federal Railroad Administration as their office tech. And then I did some designs for Western Railway Museum before the California State Railroad Museum. But really, all of the work that I do in any of the jobs that I have all of my experiences and opportunities have really deeply informed the work that I do at the Railroad Museum. Oh, here we go. So as I said, a lot of the times people think that, you graduate and then you're automatically funneled into your career position. Well, that wasn't really the case. It more looks like this. So all of these different experiences inform the work that I do here at the Railroad Museum. In addition to my personal life experiences and my projects and things that I've worked on throughout my career, my work at the museum is also informed by a larger paradigm shift, both in anthropology but also museums. So we're seeing a shift, and I'm sure you guys probably talk about the shift in anthropology paradigms in your classes as well, but we're really seeing a shift from the temple to the forum. So a very brief history of museums. They started as wealthy people opening their homes to less wealthy people to come see all the cool things that they have amassed and collected with their wealth. Then we've moved into explorers going out into the world, gathering cultural objects from around the world and bringing them back and sticking them in a cabinet and saying, hey, look at all this cool stuff that I have, and thinking about it and thinking about cultures. And collections practices in general, both in anthropology and biology, I think, inform collections practices in museums, or at least the history of them. At the Railroad Museum, we're looking at facts, historical facts that are in the historic record and technical details. This is what was written. This is the story that we're telling. The temple is predominantly a white male narrative with white male narrators, because those are the people that were recording the history. And that's true for anthropology as well. And that they're closely linked to, the temple is really closely linked to those early anthropology and biology collecting practices, and then the traditional museum etiquette, which is no touchy, right? So then a bunch of things have happened in our culture since then. This is not all, this is some. Major cultural, social, and cultural movements. We have the civil rights movement, In 1990, we had the Native Americans Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which put a huge new lens over the way we house collections, who has collections, what collections we keep and what collections we give back, and who do we give them back to. That started a huge debate. It took almost 20 years to actually get it really going, and even now we're still struggling with how it is and who it is that we give those items back to. And that's not just human remains, but objects and funerary objects and all kinds of material culture that should go back to those people. Economy, the Great Recession had a huge impact on museums because our funding models are changing. So we're no longer legacy institutions where large donors with lots of money drop that money into our institutions. We're looking at people holding on to their money. We're also looking at a new generation of people with wealth and thinking about how they spend their money is totally different. And then we have other major trauma events in our culture. The events at Ferguson, the shooting of Trayvon Martin, and so many other mass trauma events in our culture that I can't even begin to talk about right now. And those things have been incredibly important for the shift in conversation in museums about 21st century museum practices. Those things in our culture, museums are starting to ask the question, how are we relevant and how do we stay relevant? And how do we provide places for our community to come and heal from those major events that have been happening? If you look at, and I didn't do this, but if you do this, if you go back and you look at the last 10 years of museum conferences and anthropology conferences as well, you'll start seeing a huge shift in how, like what the themes of those conferences are. They're all about diversity and decolonization and creating places for people to have voice and places for people to come and be a part of their community. So now we're in this forum model, right? So that's creating open spaces for community to come together, creating more inclusive narratives, becoming of, by, and for all of your community, inviting many voices, shared authority, co-created, which is community-created or collaboratively created exhibits and interpretive programming, being more reflective about how we're telling stories and what stories we're turning to the light, using storytelling. And storytelling, I'm not just saying like we're making up a story, we're tapping human emotion and to create empathy through the way that we talk about the cultures that we're exploring in our various exhibits, to create that deeper human connection and to create more understanding between our community members about each other, but also about themselves. And then looking at how do we employ inquiry-based learning, hands-on learning, and open-ended play as a way to explore multiple modes of learning. So museums are asking the questions, cultural institutions are asking, how do we provide a place for our community to come together and share their thoughts and feelings and their stories? Who do we talk to create diverse voices in our institutions? What do we value and why do we value that? Especially around collections. And then, of course, that ever-present nonprofit question, how much is it going to cost to do all of this? So let's answer some of those questions. The first thing is asking your community, and then the biggest part of that is listening. Because if you don't listen, there's no point in asking. The work that we do is about amplifying those voices that haven't been heard. They're not voiceless communities. There's no community that's voiceless. Any group of people has a voice. It's about amplifying those voices. There's a lot of spaces where communities who are deemed voiceless communities just haven't had the opportunity to have their voice heard. So it's important to start asking them and listening and then amplifying their voices in our space. Letting go of control and authority, this is probably the toughest thing for institutions that have had the privilege of being unquestioned authorities. Opening the doors and saying, we want to hear what you have to say and we want to reconcile the friction between history and memory is a big part of that forum mindset. And then to answer the question about how much is it going to cost, well, it's going to cost as little or as much as you have, because it's not about, there's some components of it that are about physical change, but really what it's about is a working philosophy. It's about a mindset and approaching everything that you do with this mindset and this working philosophy. So recognizing that as interpreters and designers and collections managers, that we come to the table with our own worldview and our own biases, and to maintain active awareness of these biases and reflect on how those impact the work that we do with our community, and then how that impacts the content that we amplify and choose to turn to the light through our interpretive programming, both exhibits and educational programming. And what it really is about this. It's about being of, by, and for all of your community. And if you get a chance, Google it, because it's awesome. So of, by, for all is not necessarily a new concept, but it's what Nina Simon did was she's looked at all of these changes happening in the world and really codified all of them under this one banner of the of, by, for all change network. And so the change network programs that she set up provide approachable tools for museums to employ in the work that they do, and to bring that forum mindset into more institutions that think that they don't have the time, the money, the staff to do it. But in fact, they can. And so becoming an of, by, and for all institution is really moving the entire field in that direction. So about 2.5 years ago, we released a brand new strategic plan. It was created before I got there. It was created before my director got there. So we had a really pretty comprehensive study about what our institution was and what our institution wasn't. And so what we started doing was working with that and shifting our temple practices to a more forum, community-centered situation. And what we did was we started with our values. So it's not, you don't just go immediately from temple to forum. There's all these steps in between, because it's essentially building the plane while you're flying it. So you've got all these things going on. How do you figure out how to do that from nothing? So we started with our values. We got all of our team together in a room and we talked about what our values were, how they were expressed in the world, what those mean to us. Our values are community service, museum excellence, diversity, relationships, participation, sustainability, and innovation. So then we took all of those things and we worked with our values for, I don't know, maybe 6 to 9 months. And in our world, that's actually a really long time to work with a set of operational practices, because culture change is slow inside of an organization. So we took our values and we worked with those for a little while. We took our primary story filter, which is our lives are made of railroad stories, and we tell the stories of the railroad through the stories of people. And we started doing exhibits around those. We started thinking about how do we incorporate our community, how do we incorporate people's voice in these exhibits that we're doing, how do we do it? And so we started experimenting with some temporary exhibits in our roundhouse and in some other places in the museum. So then we took our values, and as Nina Simon's organization, her change network was starting to gain momentum and moving us beyond the 21st century museum practices into something that is truly of, for, and by our community, we started thinking about what that actually means to us. So what that means is that we're a laboratory of learning. We're not just the authority. We create learning opportunities for interns, for staff, for our docents. We engage in developing more hands-on and open-ended, inquiry-based exhibits that provide more immersive learning environments for our community. We're also a museum as community. We tell the stories of the railroad through the stories of people. So we talk about people first. Which might seem like to anthropology students, of course you talk about people first. But in a technical industrial museum, that's not the first place to go. The first place to go is to talk about how many tons of water this steam locomotive can carry, or how many pounds of coal it takes to build tractive force to go up a mountain, or how many rivets do you put in a boiler to make sure that, it doesn't fall apart on the tracks, or how many trains do you need to do whatever it is you're trying to do. So having people's story forward has been a huge cultural shift within our institution. And I should talk very, very briefly about the makeup of our organization, because internal culture is just as important as external culture, right? So our internal organization, we have 13 full-time staff members for the size of institution that we are. We have quite a few seasonal employees that work in our library and archives, but also in our visitor services. And we have over 500 docents and volunteers. And those volunteers, of those 500 volunteers, we have about 150 that actually come in regularly and are scheduled to work our floor. So they're doing interpretation when we're not there to do the interpretation. And we all come from vastly different cultural backgrounds and across age spectrum. So our staff is mostly made up of new Parks employees like myself, and Parks employees that have been there for anywhere from 10 to 27 years and have been doing it for a long time. Our docent population is primarily retired white men, because those are people who are interested in the railroad. They're generally engineers, scientists, former teachers, guys who've been working on the railroad for a really long time. So there's a struggle to shift our culture as well, right? Because we have to create buy-in around all of these things to get everybody moving in this direction so we can have a positive impact on our external culture as well. So we're a museum as community, both internal and external. Our museum as community is really about engaging our community in co-created exhibits to ensure that all of the things that we do are created with our community, by our community, and for our community. And we're also a museum without walls. So we're not just the four walls of our building. The Railroad Museum sits in Old Sacramento State Historic Park, which is the passenger station, the Eagle Theater, the Sacramento Southern Railroad. So we run an excursion train line down the track and back the track. But we also want to be bigger and more than that. We want to do more community outreach. That includes our social media and working in the digital world with creating and digitizing our collections and making them available and accessible online. So in all of the projects and exhibits and interpretive programming, the choices we make, we use these three principles as our guiding light. But by now in the conversation, you're probably wondering what it is I actually do. So let's talk about that. I really hate to break it to you, but like 75% of my job is project management, communication, and teamwork. And I know you all probably hate group projects, but this is the place to learn and experiment with working with people and communicating with people. Because if you ruin a relationship in college, that's fine. You end the class, you don't really have to see that person ever again. It doesn't impact eating or living or your career. Museum industry and anthropology are small fields. Word gets out about how difficult or easy or how well you communicate. So experiment now, because it doesn't matter as much right now. It's not a big as deal as you think. Be really reflective about how you learn to communicate with your team. Because when you get into this kind of situation, it's high stakes all the time. I mean, we're not saving babies, but we're doing really important work, and relationships are important. So a lot of my work is working with teams. This is my team, well, some of my team pictured here. This is the team that worked on the women's exhibit that will be installed in a week. making projects run on time, making sure each of my team members. I have a brilliant copywriter. She's an incredible historian. She does a lot of research, Debbie Hollingsworth. And, my job is to make sure she's getting copy to me on time, making sure graphics design is in production, making sure that these things are getting fabricated and built on time. So then I couldn't really divide this stuff up because it's all interrelated. So I also do exhibit design and interpretive programming, but focus primarily on exhibit design. I also get to spend a reasonable amount of my time thinking about some really cool ideas. Like I get paid to think about bigger, larger picture questions that are really cool. 100% anthropology. So here are some of the really cool ideas I get to think about. I'm not going to share them all, but in terms of community, where does visual and sensory engagement meet storytelling? How do we express a complicated idea through open-ended play? How can I use my privileged position to provide a platform to amplify the voices of my community who have not yet had the opportunity to be heard in this space? The Railroad Museum only has 3 women in the entirety of the museum. It's 2 football fields, 2 acres of property. And we have Leah Rosenfeld, Rosie the Riveter, who is not actually a railroad person, and one other person, I can't even remember her name. There's only 3 women in the entire museum. That's insane. Where did all the women go? Were women not working on the railroad? Were there not people doing work? Imagine all of the people in this room. Every single person in this room has their own history and their own story, where they came from, who their family is, what they're doing in their life. All of you have your own story. The Transcontinental Railroad has been around for 150 years, and it's only the story of men being told. That's insane. So, for the women's exhibit, we highlight 7 of these women, and we're bringing their faces and their names really big into the museum. What is storytelling is an interesting question I get to think about. How do you tap human emotion to create empathy for stories that may seem different and not obviously relevant to community members? Where does visual and sensory engagement meet storytelling? So you've got a great story to tell, but what does it look like? What historic images, contemporary images are you using to tell that story visually? Because the first thing you're going to see is the picture, not the words. Some people might not even read the panels, and that's okay. But if they're seeing the face of a person, they're getting some of that message. So I get to think about a lot of really cool stuff. Museums are awesome. So let's walk through the creation of an exhibit from concept to design. How am I doing on time? Good? Yeah? 10 minutes? Okay, I'll go quick. Okay, so this is our design process. It's a living process. It changes every time. We have a general basic premise of how we design exhibits because there's just a process by which you have to do it. So we gather community advisory committees or subject matter experts. This is them in a room. We do a storytelling workshop to define authenticity, which is driving emotion, trajectory of our story. We design and decide the look and feel. We write copy and do a bunch of historical research. We do graphics design, fabrication, and installation. And then we open, and we go from something like this to something like this. And now, instead of just a picture on the wall, we have interpretive content to go along with that picture and tell the story of what that picture is really trying to say. So we've done several temporary exhibits, and really there's a huge component of my job that is experimental. So as we do, every project we do, we're experimenting with a new facet of storytelling or exhibit design. So in this case, Snowbound in the Sierra and Death Valley Scotty, we're experimenting with storytelling and the way that we tell stories. So in Snowbound, we decided to tell a 2-track story. It's about the city of San Francisco getting caught in the Sierra in a giant, massive snowstorm in 1952, and everybody thought they were going to die. They were trapped there for 3 days with zero communication. They didn't know if anybody was going to come visit them. Well, at the same time, while the passengers were trapped in this train and experiencing all of the things that they experienced, there's crew and Mexican track workers with shovels coming to their rescue. So we told the story of the crew and the story of the passengers in this story. And that's a pretty different way than just putting the academic book on the wall. So we're also experimenting with open-ended play. There's a show on Netflix called Abstract, and in the second season, there's a really great episode called Designing for Play. I highly recommend it. But that particular show, Inspiration from the World, got me thinking about how we interpret big, transcendent ideas with a hands-on activity. So for our Rotary Snowplow exhibit this year, and this exhibit will be in until March, so you can go play with it if you'd like. We got Rigamajig and 1,000 foam cube blocks and asked our visitors to build a snow removal machine to get the snow blocks off of the tracks. And they're building all kinds of things, but they're learning about engineering, about how things work, about how you attach something to do this or do that, how pulleys work, all kinds of stuff. They're not just learning about how to move snow off the tracks or that the rotary snowplow moves snow off the tracks. It's a bigger, broader, transcendent theme, and there isn't any obvious solution. And that's really where we're headed with our hands-on activities. We're also experimenting with materials. So we're printing on wood and printing on acrylic and printing on, you name it. I got a laser cutter. It's really cool. So we're doing all kinds of different stuff. This picture here in the corner is our Ray Carrington, the industrial art of Ray Carrington. And it's got all wood materials inside of this exhibit. It's pretty cool. So why experiment and do all of these things? Well, it's really about figuring out how to tell a better story with visual information. So the Chinese railroad workers experience really brings all of that shift in museum thinking and that underlying paradigm to the surface for us. From the beginning of the Chinese workers' experience, so for the 150th anniversary, we wanted to redesign some part of our Transcontinental Railroad gallery. 90% of the workforce on the Central Pacific Railroad were Chinese workers. Do you know how many historic photographs there are of Chinese railroad workers? There are 5. Thomas Hart was a photographer for the Central Pacific Railroad in 1863 to 1869 when the Transcontinental Railroad was built, and he only took 5 pictures of 90% of the workforce building the Transcontinental Railroad. So we took those 5 pictures, and we took all of the historical research we could find, and we said, okay, well, let's use this information to recreate and design an exhibit. There was already some infrastructure in place. These images that you see here, this was already here. There was already the Chinese moment in the Transcontinental Gallery. But what was important for us was to engage our community in this conversation and to really build community relationships in a way that we've never really done before at the Railroad Museum. We also wanted to get away from that big academic God voice from nowhere and provide a space in the museum for our community to speak, for our community to have a voice. So we set up a Chinese advisory committee, and the Chinese advisory committee is primarily made up of the U.S.-China Railroad Friendship Association. These are Chinese community members who are really actively involved in sharing the story of that 90% workforce of the Transcontinental Railroad. So we got them together with us. We also have members from the Locke Foundation, Sacramento Chinese Cultural Association, APAPA, and then Dr. Gordon Chang and his team at the Stanford Chinese Railroad Workers Project of North America. They've been doing research for the past 6 years on the Chinese contribution to building this nation. So like our other exhibits, we worked with the advisory committee and ran it through the process. We did storytelling workshops with them, and then we would do periodic check-ins to make sure that we were all still on the same page and moving in the same direction. And now this is what it looks like. So we put big backlit panels in. We talked to descendants and gathered descendant stories. And really our biggest goal with this exhibit was to put names and faces to the Chinese railroad workers, because oftentimes they're just talked about as a collective, because there's only 5 pictures of them. Historic record wasn't kept very well. And due to discrimination, many, if not all, of the Chinatowns were burned down. So we know that letters were being written. We know that journals were probably being kept. There were people who could write and speak and converse in Chinese in these Chinese towns and in the Chinese workforce. But because of the arson, we don't have a lot of that left in the historic record. And we were unable to find historic letters from home. Cool. So it was really important for us to talk to descendants and hear what they had to say about the memory of their ancestors working on the Chinese railroad. So the overall perspective of the exhibit is we go really big and then down into those individual stories. And again, with our exhibits, with these big backlit panels, which are new to the museum as well, I've really seen, every time I'm on the floor, I see visitors stopping and actually reading the content and getting into the story. And part of that is that they're incredibly well written, because I have a brilliant copywriter. But the other part is because we're telling a human story. And once you read one panel, you want to know what's going to happen next. And you want to know what's going to happen next. And so they're really engaging and thinking about the exhibit. And I think probably the most interesting thing about this particular exhibit is that we don't really shy away from talking about the Chinese Discrimination Act or the gold miners tax or any of these things. We talk very directly about them. And so when I hear people talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act, the conversation is, wow, that's really interesting, because in 1892, they're saying a lot of the same things that they're saying about immigrants today. That language is almost exactly the same. So we're actually, through creating empathy and story, able to bring historical things that people may have thought happened in the past are no longer happening to the present, and make a connection between those things and our actual daily lives. But it's more than just about creating a product, which is our exhibit, getting things up on the wall, and amplifying the voice of our community. It's really about building a community that engages with the museum and sees themselves here. We want our community to see themselves in and as the museum being their space. And that's really what the Chinese exhibit has done, creating an institution that is truly of, by, and for all of our community. Our lives are made of railroad stories. Share your story here. Thank you. Oh, yeah. So as closing thought about sharing your story, we've been working for the past 2 years also to develop an internship program, and we do have internships available. We currently have internships available in our library and archives and our collections. So if you're interested, keep an eye out on the Parks website, or I'll pass it around through your professors. Any questions? You guys want to get out of here? All right, have a great day. Thanks for coming.